Hey there. Thanks for being with me here this week. This week's just going to be you and I hanging out, chatting like the old friends that we are, or maybe the new friends that we are, whichever one fits for our situation. As you can probably tell by the title of this episode, got some news to share with you. That news is moving to Alaska for the winter. Within the last week or so, Eileen and I have decided to make the jump, to make the plunge, maybe the cold plunge, if you will, into staying in Alaska for the winter. And, I kind of chuckle because in many ways it feels like a big decision. It felt like a big decision. It's been one of those decisions in life where people are like, why are you doing that? That doesn't really make sense. What about the darkness and what about the cold? And like, are you sure you really want to do that? And it kind of brought me back to a lot of other decisions that I've made in my life that I think have left people sort of scratching their head and wondering, why are you doing that? I'm not sure this really makes sense. And are you sure you've thought this through? Phrases like that. So I guess I wanted to reflect on some of that and share with you, bring you up to speed on this next chapter in my life and in Eileen and I's lives, and just take you through some of this process and how I think about things like this, and ultimately share a message that I think is important when it comes to building a meaningful life. And it has to do with something that we should be, I think, paying attention to, and a kind of signal that it's time for us to make an important decision in our lives. So let's chat about it. All right, my friends, so there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, of course, the big question is why? Why are we moving to Alaska for the winter? I think in order to answer that question in the right way, I have to take you back a little bit and explain how we've got here. So it was last summer, the summer of 2023, that we made our first trip in our van up to Alaska. We left, actually, I remember the day so vividly. We left the lower 48 and we crossed over into Canada. We were meeting our friends, Deidre and Garen, on Vancouver Island. And so we crossed on July 4th, which felt like a oddly not patriotic thing to do on our country's Independence Day. Anyway, we were on the boat traveling over to Vancouver Island. We crossed over into Canada on July 4th. Met with our friends Deidre and Garen, and then we started about a 2-week trek up to Alaska last summer. We got up to Alaska, I think around the 20th of July, and we spent about 6 weeks until about September 1st adventuring around. I had been to Alaska before. My family actually we drove all the way from Michigan to Alaska when I was in 3rd grade. And I don't know, I think we put like 10,000 miles on the car that we drove on that trip, all through like middle school, high school, college. That was always my fun fact. When I'd like introduce myself and say, hey, I'm Chad, here's something about me. It was always, I've driven to Alaska. And that was always like, whoa, what, you have? So last year was my second drive to Alaska. New in many ways, but especially new because we were taking the van with us. And so it was me, Eileen, our pup, Sadie. And we piled in the van and we made the drive, and we were caravanning with our friends from Canada. And so we had just a great 6 weeks. I have a family member who lives up in Alaska, and so we spent some time with him. We got to do all these cool new things and just travel around and take in the beauty of what Alaska holds and represents. And oh my gosh, if you've never been here, I can't recommend it enough. It is such an incredible place as far as natural beauty and the adventure that it presents, and some of the sights to see, and just the experiences, like the things that you get to do in Alaska. If you are a outdoor oriented person, you enjoy being in nature, you enjoy just kind of seeing what nature has in store and experiencing life that way, then I really cannot recommend coming to Alaska enough. So obviously we had a great time. We had a great 6 weeks last year, and that was enough to get our gears turning about like, I think we want to go back next year. Again, this was back in 2023. And so it didn't take us too long. I think at some point over the winter, we kind of solidified like, all right, we're going to go back to Alaska next summer. And we're going to go longer. We're going to go for the whole summer. I mean, 6 weeks feels like a long time, yet at the same time, traveling around and being in the van, you just have access to go pretty much anywhere. And it felt like there were still parts of the state that we haven't visited yet. There were still experiences we wanted to have. There were still all these recommended places that we hadn't crossed off the list yet. So we wanted to go for longer. And I guess we decided we wanted to go for the whole summer. That felt like, I don't know, a sort of once in a lifetime type of experience. Like, let's go spend the whole summer in Alaska. So fast forward back to June of this year, and it was the end of May, and we started making our way back up to the Canadian border right around June 1st. And I think it was just after that we crossed over into Canada. We started our trek back up, and by mid-June this year, we were back up in Alaska for the summer. Again, just all kinds of fun. I mean, we got to explore some new areas like Valdez and McCarthy. We got to hike on glaciers, which we didn't do last year. My mom and my grandma came to visit us for 10 days, and then Eileen's parents came to visit us for 2 weeks. We got to take both of them, both groups, all over the state and do all kinds of cool things. I mean, we were flying, we were on boats, we were on trains, we were hiking, we were walking. Every mode of transportation we got to do. We've got to meet some really unbelievable people here. We had our first fishing experience. We got to fish for sockeye salmon in the Kenai River, and we stood in the river. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, but we stood in the river for like 7.5 hours, thanks to our friend Tyler, who took us out there. And it was just such a beautiful, cool, unique experience that felt like it was just a pure Alaskan experience. We had this beautiful day, and you're catching this salmon, and then you get to fillet it all and package it. And then, I mean, that's what you get to eat. And just knowing that, like, wow, I caught this out of the river yesterday, and now I get to cook it up and eat it, or we learn how to smoke some of it. Anyway, it's just been an incredible, incredible experience. And so it was about a month ago in August that we wanted to do an adventure out on the Denali Highway, which is this really remote, scenic drive. It's about 135 miles. It's kind of in the central interior of Alaska, and it goes from the city of Cantwell on the west side over to the city of Paxton on the east side. Most of it is not paved. Most of it is a dirt road. Anyway, we made it about 25 miles out there, and we found this beautiful spot to camp for the night right on this creek called Seattle Creek. Just gorgeous. I mean, sitting there listening to the river flow by, and we were kind of up on some elevation so you could see out, and like there's nothing to see out there other than raw, untouched, beautiful nature. There's no buildings. There's really no roads out there. It was just an incredible, incredible place. One that we didn't want to leave, kind of metaphorically, until we found out that we literally could not leave because in the morning we woke up, it was kind of chilly. I went to turn on the van just to start it and run some heat, and the van would not start. And so, a few things kind of run through your mind. We had this error code that said that the transmission was not in park. And then I looked down at the shift stick, and I'm like, well, it's clearly in park. I mean, we haven't touched it since last night. We haven't driven it at all. And so that kind of got my gears turning and thinking, this seems like it could be maybe something electrical that's going on? Question mark. Anyway, we let Sadie, our dog, outside, and as soon as she got let out, she started going crazy, sniffing underneath the van, and especially up near the front underneath the hood, and that got me worried that I wonder if something got into some of our wiring. So I went out there and popped the hood open, and immediately it was pretty evident that something had gotten in and started to chew up some of the wires, and I could see just some damage and like some frayed wires. Some of the coating and sheeting around some of the wires was ripped up, but in some places not the actual wires themselves. But the more digging that I did, the more I just saw more and more damage from some kind of rodent. As we've talked to locals and other people, it sounds like could have been either just a ground squirrel or even a porcupine. It's kind of common that the porcupines will get in and chew up a bunch of wires. Anyway, something got in there overnight and had a field day. and chewed up so many wires. I mean, I've got pictures of massive wire harnesses that have 7-8 wires that are all frayed and completely chewed through. There's a few connections that were completely severed. And so pretty quickly it became clear that probably weren't going to be able to fix that ourselves. I've done a lot of work on the van and I did the whole build myself, but this felt like it was probably out of reach for my capability. And I guess you just risk messing something else up if I start playing around with things. So anyway, that initiated the process of getting our insurance involved. We were stranded in this location by this creek. Again, it was beautiful, so it wasn't the worst thing in the world. But we couldn't move, and we were about 25 miles from the closest town. So we were stranded out there for about 36 hours before we got the van finally towed. Someone came out and picked us up, towed us about 3 hours to the nearest Ford dealership, which was up in Fairbanks, Alaska. And as I'm sitting here recording this on Monday, September 9th, the van has been in the shop for almost 5 weeks now. Tomorrow will be 5 weeks. So we have been homeless for all intents and purposes. I mean, we haven't actually been, sleeping outside or on the streets, but that's our home. I mean, that we don't have another place that we live. The van has everything for us. That has been our home for the last 2.5 years. And so you just think about the idea of being uprooted from your home. It's hard. It's been a challenge. You've just got all of your routines and all of your things. And there's so many things related to the van that, whether it be the ways in which we get internet and the ways in which we store things and our water and all these different situations that you're just so used to having figured out and maintaining, and you've got figured out for living in the van, for van life. And now that's not our lifestyle anymore. So we had to pretty quickly pivot and find some Airbnbs and find some different places that we can stay. And again, a huge thanks to my cousin Greg, who lives out here, who was super kind, and so many of our friends who reached out and were like, hey, is there anything that we can do? We're in the state. Can we help somehow? And so having that community was really helpful during a time of, it's kind of first world problems relative to a lot of things that could go wrong. It was definitely an inconvenience more than anything. And it's still just challenging. It's just a lot of new territory to navigate. I think the hardest part of it was navigating and going about the unknown. You just didn't know. We don't know what's wrong with the van. We don't know how much this is going to cost. We don't know how long we're going to go without the van. We don't necessarily know where we're going to stay and what that's going to look like. We don't know how this is going to translate into what we're doing for work, and is this going to affect our work and our ability to earn an income. So it was all this unknown that I think was the most difficult part about, and has continued to be the most difficult part about this whole situation. When you feel like you're at the mercy of someone else or something else, and you just feel like you can't control what's happening in your life. I felt like no matter what, we couldn't really do anything to speed up the van getting fixed. We couldn't really do anything to order the parts or have the parts get here and shipped even faster. You just kind of feel like you're waiting and hoping, and all of that unknown just makes you feel uneasy. It's very unsettling. So that sort of leads us to this decision of deciding that we are going to move to Alaska for the winter. So why did we ultimately decide to do that? Well, I guess the first part of it is I actually had kind of an inkling, a hope that we might stay for the winter. As I think about why that is, why that was, why I was interested in staying, I think there were a couple parts of it. One was I just feel like being here has afforded a lot of really new experiences. We've gotten to do some new, really cool things, whether that be, as I've talked about, walking on glaciers, flying in planes, going in trains, fishing in the river. I'd love to try hunting. I'd love to try snowmobiling, which is what we call it from Michigan, but up here they call it snow machining. We were corrected on that one. I'd love to try cross-country skiing. I would love to try snowshoeing. I mean, there's so many things. I want to see more of the Northern Lights. There's so many things that I feel like we could still experience in Alaska. And so that was appealing to me. And I think the other thing was I was just ready to winter. Like, wintering to me is just kind of hunkering down, spending some more time inside, laying low. Growing up in Michigan and being from that part of the country, that was just kind of always part of your life, was like summer has longer days, it's beautiful outside, you're spending time outside, you're on the water, you're more active. And then come wintertime, it's darker for more of the day, it's colder. It's not that you don't go outside or don't do anything, but there's this kind of seasonality both to what you experience outside in nature. And then I think that there's a seasonality to us as human beings, the kind of ebbs and flows of different times of year. And I think that's a good thing. I think we need that, like experiencing some of the highs and the hustle and bustle and the go and the long days and the energy of the summertime, counteracted by some of the darkness and the cold and some of the just kind of doing less, more resting, more relaxing, more being inside, more focusing maybe on some different hobbies, or heck, just watching a TV show or a movie. I feel like that ebb and flow of the seasons, I don't know, kind of mimics how we as humans, I think, best. Hey, it's Chad here, and this is an ad for this show. I want to personally say thanks for tuning in to the podcast. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for a while, it means a lot that you're here. I'm not asking you for money. Actually, I'm asking for you to take a small action to help grow the show. More specifically, there's 3 things you can do to help grow the show and spread meaningful conversations like the ones that we have here. First is to leave a rating or review for the show on the platform that you're listening on. It takes about 10 seconds and can make a big difference. Number 2 is to subscribe or follow the show on whatever platform you're listening on, just so that you make sure you get notified of each episode that's published. Lastly, number 3 is to share the episode. Whether you send a text to a friend, talk about the episode at your next book club, or make a post on social media, sharing goes a long way to help. So thanks again for listening, and thanks in advance for taking a small action to help the show. Okay, back to the episode. Perform, or at least I've noticed that within myself. I can be energetic, I love experiences, I can do a long day, and then I need time to just recuperate. And so that feels important to me. And it's been interesting as we've been in the van for the last 2.5 years. Essentially we've been avoiding winter. We've been trying to position ourselves to be in warm places all year round. For example, we spent the winter a couple of years ago. We were in Florida. We were in Phoenix, Arizona. We were down in San Diego, California. I mean, I think we went a whole couple of years without barely ever seeing snow and it ever really getting that cold, probably below like 40 degrees. And that was definitely, it was nice. It was a new experience. Again, coming from Michigan, it was something different from what we were used to all of our lives. And it was nice. I mean, definitely enjoyed it. And it was just interesting now reflecting on being at this point. It's kind of the end of the summertime. I actually found myself feeling ready to winter, ready to relax, ready to slow down. The rate at which we travel is pretty fast, pretty significant. I mean, to think about, in March of this year, of 2024, we were down in Florida. And then by June, we were crossing into Canada. And by mid-June, we were all the way up in Alaska. So in like a 2 or 3 month period, we went all the way from Florida to Alaska. And we had done something similar the year before. And just to think about how much travel and the mileage that we've covered. And, it's an incredible thing. And it takes a toll on you physically, mentally, emotionally, being in new places all the time, having to navigate new situation, understand new places, make all the decisions that come along with living in the van. It's just a very different experience. And it can be a pretty taxing lifestyle. As fun as it is, as rewarding as it is, there's definitely some cost to it. It's taxing on your overall energy, I would say. So it felt appealing to me to have this kind of wintering experience. And so I was leaning towards staying in Alaska. Eileen was a little bit more uneasy about it. I think she was a little unsure of, the cold and the darkness. And sometimes you just talk to people, especially people who live a little further north in the interior of Alaska. If they live in Denali, if they live in Fairbanks, people talk about, the temperatures are -40 and you've got 4 or 5 days or 4 or 5 hours of sunlight during the day, of daylight. And that's all you get. And so it's dark and it's cold and, all these different things. And it's like, that seems so scary. And to me, again, I kind of just thought of it as a new experience. I thought it'd be really interesting. And so I was still interested in it. Anyway, with this whole unknown of the van situation and not being sure what was going to happen, what the timeline was going to be, as we sit here today, it's Monday the 9th, and we still have no idea when we're getting the van back. We're not even sure that any work has been done on it yet. It's been this process of working with the dealership and the insurance company and ordering parts and making sure we've got the right people to work on it. And it's very unknown. It's very unknown. So we've been waiting, dealing with that uneasiness. And so finally we started to think about, well, what would it really look like as the calendar crossed into September? It was like, we might need to make a decision about what we're going to do. And maybe it's time to bring some certainty into our situation. So that led us to reach out to a couple of friends, a couple of social media acquaintances, if you will, that we had been following on Instagram. And Eileen had been tracking some of their progress. They had at one point started building this small cabin in Alaska. And then they moved to Hawaii and, they had just kind of been on this really cool, unique journey. And so Eileen reached out to them and was like, hey, that cabin you were building in Alaska, is that still happening? Is that still available? We're looking for a place maybe to rent for the winter. What's going on there? And so their names are Z and Lily, and they reached back out and were like, actually, we just finished the cabin or are putting some of the final touches on it. And we're going to put it on Airbnb in the next couple of weeks. But if you guys wanted to rent it long term, we're open to exploring that. And so fast forward, we talked through some of the details of what it would look like. And, then it just came decision time to decide, do we really want to spend the winter in Alaska? Is this what we want? Is this what's going to be best for us? Is this going to lead us to some of these fears that, our mental health would suffer being in the dark, and being in the cold would be really challenging? And would it ultimately create a more unhealthy reality for us? And we had to come across some of those fears. And I don't know, there was something about it, I think for both of us, that it felt right. It felt important. And despite some of the unknown, it felt like bringing some level of certainty into our situation, where we don't know when we're getting the van back. We don't know what that's going to look like. We're at the mercy of this whole situation. Let's take something into our own hands and make a decision that at least brings some certainty into what our lives are going to look like. Something about that felt right and felt important. And it didn't really take long, probably within 24 hours. I think we just talked about it a little bit. We came and saw the place, and it was beautiful. And so this cabin that we had the opportunity to stay in, it immediately felt like, wow, we could really make this home for the winter. And so we ended up saying yes. And we ended up deciding that this was the route that we wanted to go. And we signed a lease with them through April of 2025. So to get us through the winter, we do have to travel back to Michigan next April. So this will be our home and our place to stay for the winter. And, as soon as we made the decision, I think for me, there was just this level of peace. Like, finally, we know something. We know that this is going to be our home. And we don't know what's going to happen with the van. We don't know what the timeline's going to look like. We don't know what some of the costs are going to look like. And yet we know that we have a place that we can call home. We'll be comfortable. We will be safe. And we'll have a place that we can enjoy. And for me, it was like I can get this sort of winter experience that I guess I felt like I was needing and looking for. And it was funny. I was listening to an episode of one of the podcasts that I really enjoy is Mike Rowe's podcast. He's the guy from Dirty Jobs, if you've ever seen that show. He has a really interesting show, and he has a lot of really thoughtful conversations. I think he himself has been a bit of an inspiration for me. The way that he interviews and his curiosity and the way that he asks questions, I've just really learned a lot from and I've really admired. And he's a very cultured person. He does a lot of reading and he's involved in theater and he has a background in the opera and it's just a really fascinating guy. And so anyway, he was having a conversation recently and I don't remember exactly who it was with or what they were talking about, but they were talking about this idea when we as humans, the quote was like, I don't know what's going to happen, but this feels important. And that really resonated with me a lot, as far as I've felt that many times in my life where I'm approaching something, I feel like I have to make some kind of decision about something. And there's just this feeling that I have within me. It's not necessarily a thought process. It's not something I can assign logically in my brain, but there's just something that feels like it's important. It feels like it's a juncture in life where a certain decision carries a weight to it. And not emphasizing the decision itself, but more so like there feels like a path that feels like it's the one that I'm supposed to take. And it feels important. And you'll notice I'm really emphasizing this feel word because I've talked about it a lot on the show. I've spent a lot of my life thinking and making decisions with logic. And this is very different. This is not necessarily, this feeling isn't something that I can assign words to. It's not something that I can explain with reasoning or logic. It's just something that I feel within my gut, within my body. Call it intuition, call it whatever you want to call it. That's what I felt like in this decision. There was just a level of peace of like, it feels important that we stay in Alaska. This feels right. It feels like a significant sort of moment in our lives. And even though we don't know what's going to happen, it feels important that we trust whatever it is that's sending us this message, that this is the thing to do. Just make the decision and trust that it's going to work out. You're going to figure it out. It's going to be okay. And so that's what we did. We decided to stay for the winter. And, as far as what that feels like, we moved into our place on Wednesday of last week. So we've been here for about 5 days or so now. And immediately it's felt really good. I mean, it was pretty funny. The first night that we moved in, we were greeted by our new neighbors, which were a few hundred pounds each. We had a couple of moose that showed up, and I mean, they walked right across our property, right across, like 4 or 5 feet off the front deck, right across the driveway. And they spent probably 30 minutes just kind of eating on some trees and bushes directly in our property, like right out of our front door and out the side windows. And that felt like just some kind of comforting sign of like, look, here's a new experience for you already. You've got moose just sitting in your front yard and you can sit there out of your own home and watch them and just take them in. So that felt like a cool sign or experience our very first night to signal like, you know what? This is going to be okay. This is going to bring us to things that we were hoping for it to bring. And so at this point, like, I feel pretty at ease about the whole situation. Being here feels comfortable. Not going to lie, it's nice having some of the luxuries of a home, like being able to shower every day and not having to think about going to the bathroom and not having to think about getting yourself internet every time and having unlimited resources as far as water goes and not having to think about power. All these things and all these decisions, not having to make your bed twice a day, every single day. Those things, it just takes some of the weight in decision making and kind of refills the tank as far as giving you energy to focus on other things and other parts of your day, other parts of your life. And I think that part of it has felt good. It's a little unsettling as far as it is a bigger financial commitment. We are paying rent now to live in a place for the next 6 or 7 months. And that's on top of the typical expenses that we have, for the van. We still pay for the van. We still have the van. So even though we're not necessarily going to be living in it or using it, it does add more expense. And that can be a difficult reality for me. I tend to believe, well, if I keep my expenses low, then I have more freedom and more flexibility. And so we were just talking yesterday about, yes, that can be a challenge. Yes, it can be a little bit uneasy for me. And that doesn't mean it was the wrong decision. That doesn't mean that spending the money isn't worth it. And so that's what I've been thinking about. But it feels good. It feels really good. We're excited about some of the new opportunities I think that will be afforded. We've got some friends who will be here through the winter as well. Again, my cousin I just talked to yesterday on the phone, and he was like, yeah, I'll hook you up with some people who will be around for the winter, and he's going to be here for the next couple of months, and we'll make sure you've got all the things that you need as far as snow gear and just everything you need to prepare for the winter. And so having that sense of community has been really important. And ultimately, trusting this feeling of, I don't know what's going to happen, but this feels important. I guess that feels like the message that I hope you and I can reflect on coming out of this episode is, is there something in your life where you can identify that feeling? You can recognize that something feels important. Some kind of decision to make or something to pursue or something to do or to say or to not do or to leave. Is there something that feels important in your life? And maybe if you slow down and pause and take the time to really sit with it, be still, and allow that feeling to come in, allow that feeling to be recognized. I'm curious where that might lead you, and maybe that'll lead you to making some kind of decision that, like we've made, might make people scratch their heads. People have said to us, why are you doing this? Don't you know how dark it is and how cold it is? And are you going to be isolated? And are you going to be able to get out and do things? And, I think sometimes when people don't understand the decisions that we're making, that to me feels like we're on the right track. That to me feels like, well, then we're making a decision based on what we value and what's important to us. And so maybe cast aside some of that fear of what people might think or judgments that they might make, and really tune into your internal sense of knowing. And where is that leading you? Where's that taking you? I'd love to hear from you. If you've got thoughts about this, if you want to send a note about this episode, you can do that on Instagram. @ALevelDeeper is the handle for the show. Feel free to send a message. I'd love to hear some of your story about any thoughts about Alaska. If you've got tips, if you've been here, if you've got any thoughts or questions about our process, I'll be happy to answer any of those on Instagram. Or I'd love to hear some of your reflections, or, do you have a story of when you listened to this, or is there something that you're trying to work through right now where something feels important and you're not necessarily sure what to do? Maybe we can think on it together. You could also send an email. ALevelDeeperPod@gmail.com is the email address. All of those go to me. I'd love to connect with you and hear some of your stories. And aside from that, thanks for being here. Thanks for investing your time with me and spending this time together. I appreciate it. I appreciate you supporting the show and meaningful conversations. And I hope that ultimately it takes you a level deeper and makes you think a little bit into your own situation in your own life. And I think ultimately that's an important thing for us to do, just to reflect and try to gain and to keep this compass pointed towards making as meaningful of a life as we can for ourselves and knowing what that looks like uniquely for us. So thanks for being here, and I'll be back with more on future episodes in future weeks. See you next time.